For the plots that I'm gonna cover today, you only need a rake, weed eater, mower, and a broadcaster, and it can make the biggest difference in getting that big buck in front of your tree stand come this fall.
Well, what's up guys? Welcome back to another episode of Midwest Whitetail. As you can see, we're out in the woods, and before we jump into what's on this week's show, wanted to bring to attention, Gavin and I made our trip up to Michigan, and we have spent the last few days with our good friends at Latitude Outdoors. You might have seen that on social media, but take this as the official, we are working with them this year. And for those of you that aren't familiar with their company, they make a very, very in-depth system for saddle hunting. I am up here because I have literally never done that. You've obviously seen over the years at Midwest Whitetail a lot of hang and hunt, mobile style of hunting. Came up here, like I said, have never done it, wanted to learn how to do it. But more importantly, what's going to be available coming soon is a really in-depth video if you're somebody who was like me, never used it, have plenty of excuses why I'm not going to try it. And it's safe to say the only thing I took away today was how silly I was for waiting as long as I did. And I'm really excited to keep practicing that and utilize it this fall. But like I said, video is going to be coming soon. We'll bring attention to that when that is ready. And then on this week's show, before we move into Kaleb's second part of Permission Farms, the guys wanted me to talk about, if you saw my episode 2 weeks ago on the strategy for catching up with Droptine there, he is back and he looks great. Within a few days, he found that axe one pile. And you can just see the mass, you can see the brow tines. And one surprise in addition to that is the deer that I really, really believed was dead. It's that big 9-pointer, long tines, super good brows. We found multiple match sets to him. And if you look back to October, we never got a single photo of him again. And so thinking about that, seeing the shed antlers for multiple years, I really was convinced he was dead. He might be, but there's also a deer that showed up onto that pile that is very, very reminiscent of him. Super tall brow tines, and the only thing that it does is motivate me more to get these plots in order, work with the landowner, and ultimately try to give myself a chance come fall. So speaking of that, we're moving into the second part of Kaleb Greiner's Permission Farm series, and if you haven't seen it, go check it out. Part 1 was all about acquiring permission, how to keep it, creative ways to ask, etc. And moving into this one, it's all about food plots and rolling into late summer. If you think about having a permission farm, there's a lot of tools and things that you can use to your advantage to get permission to plant plots. Kaleb's gonna talk about how he goes about asking, what he might plant, and different ways to get it done. So he's also gonna bring to our attention a familiar face that showed up on a permission farm, and it's the best time of year. Chasing November is getting close to being finished up. Really excited to release that for you guys. And as always, appreciate you taking time to watch.
Oh my gosh. All right, that was nuts. That is a buck that I call Salo Jr. He was a 4-year-old here last year. We passed him up quite a few times. And gosh, the first encounter, I think Shay and I were hunting on the ground. He came out, his body was big. He was a big bodied 4-year-old when we first saw him last year, but he made it all the way through late season. We never picked up his sheds. I knew he's made it through though. It looks like he's gonna be a clean 10 this year. Who knows, maybe he's gonna throw on a 5 sometime here soon later on this summer. But I just pulled this just pulled this camera. Get it back out tomorrow, but I was too antsy. I've been looking forward to seeing how big this deer's gonna be. And I like big typicals, so we'll see what's on this card here back at the house. What's up, Chieftain?
Thanks for joining us on another week of Midwest Whitetail. I'm really eager to get this one in front of you guys. Last time you saw me, I was talking about part 1 of my 3-part series about permission hunting. I was talking about getting your cameras out there, getting that in-person scouting. Well, you know, the past couple weeks I've been real busy. I've gotten a couple cameras out. I went out this past couple days to do my first couple in-person sits, and I found a really big 5-year-old back. He was a 4-year-old this past year, had a lot of really cool encounters, and it looks like he's gonna be a mega stud. So we're starting to put the pieces of the puzzle together on a few deer here, but today we're talking about everything for food plots on permission farms. And it's not to say if you're a landowner watching this, you can't take any good information away from today's episode. There's a lot of relatability to permission and private. It's basically the same thing, you're just on the ground. So before we dive into these plots, I want to talk on the front end about how all of these plots that I'm going to talk about, you do not need heavy equipment. If you'd like to use heavy equipment, it might make your life a lot easier, a lot less labor intensive, and in some cases, using a drill versus broadcasting, you can get a lot better seed to soil contact, a lot better emergence. So if you're running into those issues, if you don't have any equipment, you want that equipment, the local NRCS office has drills that you can rent. They also have tree planters if you're into that. Or, you know, what I've done in the past, I've knocked on a neighbor's door saying, hey, would you mind if I use the tractor, or would you mind if you help me plant this plot? I'll help you out, fix some fence, here's $100, whatever it may be, to get that plot in the ground and make sure that it's established come this fall. Because sometimes, you know, these past few years, we've had some really rough droughts, and in some cases, using a drill is a lot better off than broadcasting. So the last thing that I want to cover before we dive into the plots is how I go about asking permission to put a plot in. Now, if you guys are ever in the situation where you're hunting permission farm, you want to put a plot there, but you don't go and ask permission to put that plot in. You put the plot in anyway, and you're thinking, oh, he might not see it, not a big deal, it's so small anyways, who cares? That's another way that you can get kicked off a permission farm. Do not do that. Before you put a plot in, always go to the landowner and talk, hey, Mr. Landowner, I'd like to put a food plot on this permission piece on your farm in this area, right here. It's this many acres. I wanted to check with you first though, because I don't know if it's in a program. I don't know if that's okay with you first of all, but I'd like to plant an area on your farm where I can help condense, help pinch deer down so I have more opportunities to shoot deer on your farm. Is that something that you'd be willing to let me do? It looks about like that. But at the end of the day, it's their property, so you gotta be mindful and respectful of their wishes. They're already letting you hunt in there, and you don't always need a food plot to kill a big buck. So going into the first plot that I'm gonna talk about, this is at the top of the expense. I'm gonna rank these from most expensive all the way down to least expensive. And what is most expensive in my eyes when thinking about putting a plot on a permission farm is buying big ag. And what I mean about buying big ag, I'm talking about row crop, corn and soybeans. Here in Iowa, that's pretty much the only crops that are grown, and it's the destination food source for these deer come the fall. So there's 3 options or 3 different ways that you can use a standing ag plot. The first option covers that early time frame. I'm gonna go in there probably around the first week of October to that mid-September time frame, and I'm gonna mow corn. I'm gonna mow probably 1/4 to 1/2 acre. And after I mow that corn, that leaves a bunch of waste grain on top. Those deer are gonna be attracted to it. But what I can do to make that spot even better, I can go in there with a drill or with a broadcaster, and I can broadcast or drill cereal grains. Cereal grains meaning rye, winter oats, or triticale. All the above, great options for an easy to grow green food source. Another option is mowing that corn in the middle of October. And the reason I say the middle of October is because the middle of October, a lot of these bucks, they're out kind of doing their own things and whatnot, but it's still prior to pre-rut. You know, things are starting to ramp up, we're getting there. But when I think about mowing corn that time of year, I want to attract does to that spot. When you mow corn, you're gonna have does all over it. Going into that pre-rut week, which is around the 3rd week to the 4th week of October, you're gonna have bucks coming in there checking for that first doe that comes into estrus. It's a great way to attract deer to your food plot, or to a pinch deer down per se during that time of year. Now your third option for standing ag is leaving the ag standing all the way into late season time frame. But those are just 3 different options that you can use big ag. Now the cost side of big ag. What I recommend you guys doing is checking your local commodity prices to see what the price of corn and soybeans are. So for example, your local mill, it's buying corn at $4 a bushel and beans at $10.50 a bushel. Okay, so when that farmer goes out there to harvest that crop, if he's cutting beans or picking corn, he is gonna have a yield that he averages throughout that field. That's the amount of grain that they are taking in per acre. So if I go off of his yield average and I times that by the commodity prices that he's selling back to the mills, then I can come up with a price to give this landowner. Now, when I come up with that price, say it's 200 bushel corn is what he averaged on his field, and it's $4 corn, that's $800 that I need to pay him, because that's what he would have averaged on that acre that I just bought. Now, what I personally do, if I'm gonna do that, I'm gonna give him an extra 10, 20 bushel per acre on whatever I buy. That way I just fluff up the deal. I make it a little nicer, more attractive for him to leave that grain there for me every year. Another option when purchasing ag from a farmer, maybe try finding a corner where there's a little bit more damage to that corn from coon or deer. It might fluff up the deal to where it's a little cheaper for you. Now, last thing I want to hit home on with this big ag is where to put your plot. And for me, if I'm leaving standing food in late season, I'm always thinking, okay, I got to find the south or easterly facing hillsides that is out of the wind for those dominant winds come the winter months. The winter, it's cold, it's windy. We get 60-mile-an-hour flatline winds here sometimes. These deer want to be out of the wind. They want to be comfortable when they're feeding. So if you keep that in mind, and you keep in mind what I've hammered on the show for years now is seclusiveness, a spot that you cannot find or see from the road. These deer are gonna be comfortable out there at all hours of the day to feed out in that food plot. The next plot that I want to talk about is green to grain transition. And the way that I normally start talking with this is I give the example of, think about going out to eat with your friends or family, and you order an appetizer, get your belly up and rolling, get it ready for the main meal. Well, in deer terms, this green would be the appetizer right next to the grain, which is the destination food source, corn, soybeans. So we're essentially putting an appetizer out for these deer flowing into the ag. And you know, when I'm trying to find a location for this, I'm thinking of locations that deer are naturally coming out, like we just talked about with this big ag. That's their destination. It's the area they already want to come out. Is there a spot there now where, say there's overgrown grassy areas, it's part of a CRP contract, but hey, I can talk to the landlord and maybe I can put green there. If you can find an area like that, it will be lights out. You know, one example that I can think of off the top of my head is the River Bottom Farm. You know, looking back over the years of hunting that piece, I had a 3-acre green food plot that was a green to grain transition. I can recall Collins and I having several encounters. He got a shot off at the old 10 in October in that pre-rut time frame. And then I killed a buck tripod out of that food plot off the turnips in late season. So that food plot, it works all year, all months in the hunting season. And it's a great deadly tactic that a lot of guys use for killing big deer. Now, one thing I'll bring up when talking about these green to grain transitions is back in the day, I used to only use purple top turnips. It was the only thing that I would throw in there. I would have a monoculture in my food plot. Now today, I like getting blends out there. That way I get the diversity in my food plot. I don't just have one plant scattered all over this acre. Now, when I'm looking at the how-to of how I made that plot there, all I did, I went in there with a sprayer and I sprayed Roundup, probably about a half gallon of Roundup per 10 gallon of water. You can add some clethodim in there as well if you'd like. Your cost on that is probably gonna be somewhere around that $35 to $40 range. Now, after you spray it off, it dies. You can choose to either broadcast straight into it or you can burn it. Lately, I've only been broadcasting straight into it because that grass, all that thatch, it's gonna lay down and it's gonna create a mulch, so to say, for after you broadcast your seed. The blend that I like to use is Monster Buck Rut Greens. We've got a code down for you guys below if you guys can save some money, but that cost is $54.99 per acre. And then our last cost is gonna be fertilizer. You know, bulbs, these turnips, they need fertilizer, they need urea, and that's nitrogen, 46-00. The cost for that, it's about $20 a bag. I highly recommend if it's a new plot, if you haven't done a soil test and it's a new plot, you probably wanna hit it with 100 pounds at the bare minimum. So you're gonna use 4 bags of 46-00. Now, if it's just a plot that you've used on a year-to-year basis, I'm normally probably only gonna hit it with 1 or 2 bags right up front and then come back with a bag afterwards. So your price on fertilizer can vary, but it's somewhere in that $40 to $60 range. All right, so breaking down the costs on a per acre basis, right at the top we've got our chemical. We've got Roundup sitting right at about $35 an acre. That's a half gallon per 10 gallon of water. Now going into our seed, I talked about that Monster Buck Rut Greens mix. It's $54.99 per acre. And at the end, we've got our urea. If you're gonna put a bulb in there, you need urea, you need nitrogen. That's sitting somewhere around that $50 range. You got under $150, that's about $141 off the top of my head that I can think of. So under $150 per acre doing the steps that we just told you for this green to grain transition. For our third option of food plots for permission is poor man plots or kill plots. I'm sure you guys have seen a lot of videos and heard a lot of guys talking about this. And when I think about a poor man's plot or a kill plot per se, I'm normally thinking about a timber setting where there's a little bit of opening. We can carve out a plot here. It's normally under that 3/4 to a 1/4 acre size. And you know, initially what I want in there, I didn't used to think this way. I want clover in there. And I used to think, man, I gotta get brassicas in there. I like having clover because the deer hit it year-round. It creates a year-round food source on that property. I don't have to worry on whether or not I'm gonna get a rain in the July-August time frame and whether or not I'm gonna be hunting over a dirt plot or a turnip plot. I'd rather have that clover planted early spring and come up nice and lush and have a great tonnage come the fall. But if I'm gonna talk about how I plant the clover plots, normally if I want clover for this hunting season, I'm going to plant it in a spring month. I can either frost seed it or right after frost seed season, I've got a plot not too far from me where in late March, early April, I went in, ripped the ground, dissed it, created that seed to soil contact, broadcasted multi-year cold climate on it, and it looks awesome right now. Now, if you're planting clover in July and August, don't expect to get a lot of tonnage out of your food plot that first year in the fall months. That clover, from what I've seen, normally gets about 3 to 4 inches at max if you don't get the adequate rain. But it's gonna come up awesome and look great the next spring. It'll be fully established and it'll be nice, green, lush, and it'll get to its mature height. So if you're sitting in June, July, where we're at right now, and you don't have your clover established in a micro plot or a kill plot or poor man's plot per se, you can still get those rut greens in there. You can still get a bulb mix in there. One mix off the top of my head that I really like to utilize is One Plot ASAP. It's a plot that you can go in there. It's got grains. It's also got bulbs into it. A third option for these plots is if you are in a timber setting and you are canopied out. And what I mean by that is you have no sunlight or barely any sunlight hitting the forest floor. That means you're not gonna have much for greenery under the forest floor. You're mostly gonna have matted leaves. And a couple options that I've done in the past that have worked for me is going in there with a rake, raking the ground, and exposing that soil to get that seed to soil contact, and coming in there with cereal grains or clover or some brassicas, so to say, and seeing what germinates. You'll have a nice green carpet there. If anything, the cereal grains will come up depending on how much sunlight you have. But if you do not have that much sunlight, you might not get the best germination. But still, you can get some kind of green right there under your stand in close proximity. So breaking down the steps for this food plot, it's very similar and no different than the green to grain transition that we talked about early. We're going to spray it, we're going to seed it, and then we're going to fertilize it. Depending on your seeds, look up what fertilizer you need, but looking at the cost of things, We're sitting right back up there at $35 to the acre because all we need to do is spray Roundup. We're looking at whatever seed costs we've talked about. You know, we covered a wide variety of 3 different blends, I believe, under this. We covered multi-year cold climate, we covered rut greens, and we covered one plot ASAP. I'm a big fan of all 3 of those because all 3 have a wide variety of seed within their blends, and it's not just a monoculture out there in that plot. There's diversity, and diversity is king. So following that up with our last payment, which is going to be fertilizer, we're still sitting at $50 per acre. It's dependent on whatever you're planting, but we're still under that $150 to the acre. These are the plots where my hand tools are really paying off. I can go in there with a weed whipper, with a mower, with a rake, these hand tools, and get a plot wherever I need be. Chainsaw per se, if I need a chainsaw to cut a couple trees out and clear things up. Make sure you guys are utilizing these hand tools. They're very overlooked. You can get plots where most people think you can't, and it always makes things a little more interesting having a little green in front of your stand come fall rather than none. Now to wrap things up, I want to talk about a new blend and a new tactic that we figured out this past year. When I say we, I'm talking about Rise, standing right behind the camera right now. You know, we were hunting that river bottom farm last year, and when I went in there to move cameras around for us one of the days, you know, I found that there were some portions where the big ag, the corn was messed up. The corn had been ravaged by the coon and a little bit of deer damage as well. And I called Ryan, I'm like, dude, like, might be able to get some green in here. Sure enough, he came in there and he used a new blend that Monster Buck makes. It's called Overcast. And it's made up of a bunch of different bulbs, but what he did was essentially just walk through the rows, broadcasting that mix onto bare soil in between the corn plants. And I want to say he probably hit a 1/4 acre area, but it came up awesome. I went back there when I was checking for dead deer, looking for EHD box last fall, and holy smokes, the green was super lush. It was about 1 foot tall, and until they ended up picking that corn, it looked really awesome. But I had a bunch of really good encounters right there in front of that food plot. It's where he ended up seeing the big non-typical, and I think he had a lot of success just due to that plot being right there. This is the easiest and cheapest plot that I can come up with given all the options that I've talked about today, and that's why I like it the most. I've personally already ordered 10 bags of Overcast getting ready for these plots that I'm gonna put in down the road here in the next couple months. But I wanna hit home again. Even though we're just going in to a field broadcasting this seed, you might think that it's not very harmful, but always talk to your landlord, whoever you have permission from, whoever the farmer is, before you end up putting into that field. So diving into the cost of things, all you got is your seed. That's the only thing that you gotta buy. Hopefully you already got a broadcaster, but the seed for Overcast, it's $59.99 per acre. Once again, I've mentioned a lot of blends out of those guys, but we've got a code down below. You guys can use them to save 20% off any of these blends. But man, looking at this plot, it's something that you can use anywhere. If you're like me, you got a couple permission farms here and there, you just don't have the time to make it back or to all of them to get a plot in. This has to be the easiest plot that you can do. That covers everything, but let's reiterate, let's go over everything one more time from most expensive to least expensive. We talked about leaving big ag and buying it. We've got 3 options under that though. We talked about mowing it and drilling it for that early time frame. For the middle of October, we talked about going in there, mowing it, creating a social hub for that pre-rut activity. And then we talked about leaving that grain standing all the way till late season to have a good late hunt. Our second option was green to grain transition. This is where I talked about having that appetizer, so to say, right next to a grain food source to pinch those deer coming out of one area into their grain. Third option, I talked about our poor man style plots, our kill plots, where we use 3 different seed mixes, 1 plot ASAP, our rut greens, and our multi-year cold climate. And then I talked about, lastly, our Overcast. This is the most cost-effective, one of my favorite food plots. After learning it last year, all you have to do, go in there, broadcast, throw the seed on top of the soil and enjoy. So I hope this gave you guys a couple plans of attack to add on to the plan that you're already making this summer. But for our last step in this 3-part series, we're gonna take the information that we've gained from part 1 and part 2, and we're gonna use it for a plan of attack going into the fall. So I hope you guys enjoyed. As always, thank you for watching Midwest Whitetail, and I hope to see you back on the next one.